Welcome to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. We've got a very special guest joining us today to talk about several matters and how history can inform us about the decisions and hopefully the good decisions that are being made today by the Trump administration and by future, leaders of our country. So without further ado, Command Chief Master Sergeant retired Dennis Fritz. He served for 28 years as an U.S. Air Force veteran, served as a senior enlisted advisor to 4-star generals in various regions, and he is the author of Deadly Betrayal. Welcome to the show, Chief Fritz. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and let me say thank you for having me.
It's a great honor to have you here. I'm curious, based on your outspoken and I guess the truth-telling that you did surrounding the lead up to the Iraq war and everything that preceded that phony war, that phony invasion. Do you think that Donald Trump today has learned the lessons that you have tried to bestow upon the masses with regard to our failures in the Middle East? Do you think he's learned some of those lessons?
Well, I definitely do. And in fact, even from his previous administration, his first time as president, I think he came into office knowing the bad experiences that our previous administrations had, whether it be, quite frank with you, the Afghanistan war against the Taliban. That was a made-up war as well, and we can talk about that too. Also, the Iraq war. So Trump came in from his previous time in office a little leery about these wars that we were having, in particular the Middle East. So yes, I do think he's learned his lessons. Now, I must tell you this, Jackson, is that though he may have learned his lessons, there are folks in the environment though that wants to change that mindset of President Trump. So I can tell you, he's probably having some internal battles of the direction that he wants to go.
Well, I hope he chooses the right path. It's very difficult. I'm sure the type of pressure that they put on people. What sort of pressure do you think was installed in the leadership of the United States in the lead up to the Iraq war to get everyone in unison on what was so clearly a lie?
And let me just say this, Jackson. Definitely a lie. And before I get into that, let me just tell you what got me into this crusade. After 9/11, I think most Americans were fearful, concerned. It was really the first time that we were hit, let's say, on our homeland. We had been hit at Pearl Harbor, but actually our homeland, the main land. And we were all concerned about, in fact, I think we could say we wanted revenge, if you will. And so I think most Americans were all for going into the Afghanistan war. And then all of a sudden, as we had taken down the Taliban within a month and a half, all of a sudden, we in the military, we started seeing operational orders for Iraq and surrounding areas like Kuwait to go into Iraq. And that's when I first started questioning what in the world is going on here? Why are we going into Iraq? And then I always felt I had a problem with that. I had connections, on the Joint Staff. I wasn't, just from my perspective, seeing intel about Iraq, quite frankly, if you're having WMD. And so I started asking folks that were on the Joint Staff, which is, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and his staff. And nobody knew anything about, well, do they really have WMD? And so as I started looking into it closer, when you asked about the previous administrations, that was under George W. Bush, he was surrounded by, and now that term is known, neocons, neoconservatives. And they had been planning this war, Jackson, since 1991. An individual by the name of Paul Wolfowitz, when he was in the Pentagon back in 1991, he was a undersecretary of defense then. And, that group always felt that America's exceptionalism, we should be the bully pulpit and we could do anything we wanted to do. And to be quite frank with you, they were upset from the first Gulf War, Iraq War, because we didn't take Saddam down. And you can find that, I hate to promote my book on your show, but you can find that. I would ask your audience to go and get that book, and you'll see the original history, how we got into the war and how it leads into now. Now, regarding the Bush administration, Bush was surrounded unknowingly, probably by himself, of neocons that had been planning this, as I stated earlier, since 1991. A lot of folks find this surprising when I say this. President Bush at the time, he really truly believed in democracy. And he wanted peace in the Middle East and democracy, where there were those that was working with him, names that you've heard and before in the past, Paul Wolfowitz, who was the deputy SecDef at the time, Richard Pearl, who was a part of a defense policy board. He was the chairman of that. A guy who I worked under, Doug Feith, who was the number 3 guy in the Pentagon at the time. Well, they had an alternative goal. They wanted, on behalf of Israel, for us to take down Saddam. They wanted us to take down Assad in Syria. And then lastly, which is in the book, they wanted us to take down the Ayatollah in Iran. Unfortunately, we got bogged down in the insurgency in Iraq. Now, Bush, they took that to him and stating, listen, the only way we're going to get peace in the Middle East is to use our strong military to take down those 3 individuals we just mentioned. If we do that, that will bring peace to the Middle East, and you will go down in history, President Bush, as the person that finally brought peace to the Middle East. And so that's how they were able to convince him. You know, they all had goals of going into the Middle East. His being he truly wanted peace in the Middle East, and they convinced him the only way you're going to be able to do that is by war.
So when I was in high school, I remember there was some partial truths about the invasion of Iraq. We had moved enough years past it to reflect, and we were taught that it had everything to do with oil. But now there seems to be mass enlightenment amongst the public in our country, and that people understand that, well, yeah, oil was definitely exploited, profits were made, but there are deeper geopolitical, questions at play here about the leadership in these countries and what they mean in relation to Israel. Why was this so important for Israel?
Jackson, I'm so glad you asked that. I didn't want to get ahead of you, and that's why I stopped. So that's the perfect question for me to continue what I was saying. You know, as we look at today, the war in Gaza, the war really is still occurring in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and then in Gaza, Hamas. The reason back then for the Iraq war, and even now, was based on, as you look at the Middle East at that particular time, who were the folks that was perceived as the enemy and stopping which I would say the security of Israel? At the time, you had Saddam, who we could not control. You know, I got to tell you, America's foreign policy is about control. You know, we're the strongest world power. We should be able to control no matter who, to include, we can talk about that later, the Russians and the Russian-Ukraine war. But Saddam, we could not control him. Assad, we cannot control him, and definitely we cannot control the Iranians, the Ayatollahs. And so Bibi Netanyahu has always wanted to do what is happening now in Gaza, to take over Palestine. And he wanted to do it forcefully, and as he's doing right now, the killing of innocent women and children. But back then, Bibi had a great relationship with the neocons that surrounded President Bush. Those folks being, as I mentioned earlier, Paul Wolfowitz, to give you that history, as you stated, hey, I was in high school at the time, but Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, and Doug Feith. And they were in the Pentagon at the time, and they decided they had great communications and a great partnership with Bibi Netanyahu that, oh, Bibi, we can't do that. We will not be able to withstand the pressure that we were getting from the innocent killing of women and children. So we have a better way of doing that. In order to have peace, we have to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah. So how are we going to do that without directly going in and killing the innocent women and children in Gaza? But what we're going to do, we're going to take out those leaders. That's the geopolitical portion of it. By traditional warfare, we're going to take out their militaries. Saddam was supporting Hamas. Iran was supporting Hezbollah. Syria was supporting both. And we're going to take out those leaders. And guess what? We're going to put in our own leaders. Once we get rid of that support of Hamas and Hezbollah, then Israel will be able to make peace. The U.S. will be able to make peace with the Palestinians following our direction. In other words, you will not have no choice but to be what we want you to be. And if you go back, and that is the start. Now, let's take a look back at that and how it ties into today. Well, as I stated earlier, we got tied and bogged down in what we call an Iraqi insurgency. Our plan was to go in to Syria next, but the insurgency in Iraq stopped that. And so when it never happened, Bibi never forgot that. And so when October the 7th happened, you can go back and take a look yourself. Bibi started saying October 7th is our 9/11. Now we're going to go in and destroy and do what I wanted to do all alone, because look what happened after 9/11. He kept using that term. You know, some people have said, like 9/11, that it was an inside job, that October 7th was an inside job, or they allowed it to happen. Well, I got to tell you, Jackson, I have to think about this. I live outside of Washington, D.C., and as I think about it now, if we were being overrun by some terrorists and I'm outside of Washington, D.C., it wouldn't take hours to get there to rescue me here. So I think about that. And you know how small Israel is. Why did it take so long? Now, I'm going to answer another question. I'm going to jump the gun at 9/11. Now, there are many people that have tried to back me into a corner to say 9/11 was an inside job. But Jackson, I got to tell you, I've talked to engineers. They said, yeah, I don't know that. I tell folks I can give you facts, I can give you assumptions, and I can give you an opinion. So I'm going to tell you something. I don't know if it was an inside job, but there are many people that believe that. But what I can tell you as a fact, there were people in the Pentagon that was glad that 9/11 happened. Why were they glad? Because that gave them the absolute reason to create this so-called terror-owned war and to implement the plan then of taking out Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And Bibi was using that same excuse now for October the 7th. Now, you had your 9/11, you had your Pearl Harbor. Now, October the 7th, that is ours, and we're going to do what we wanted to do all along.
Getting back to the first question, though, you know, you say that Bibi is so motivated right now to go into Gaza, as he's been saying, and with unprecedented force and finish the job. He's basically said as much this week.
Care less about hostages.
Yeah. He's, you know, no concern about the hostages as far as I can see. He just wants to slaughter people and do that. But Donald Trump is seemingly on a different note. He's saying we need to get aid in. We need to have a better future for people in Gaza. We need to have food. I don't trust anybody. But do you think this is all real? Do you think this is a historic low in relations between the United States and Israel?
Well, you know, Jackson, as I stated earlier, I can give you assumptions and opinions. Yes. I will tell you, deep in Trump's heart, I do feel that he believes in peace. He wants to be known as the peace president. I do believe that in his heart. But at the same time, President Trump is transactional. You know, what can I get out of this? I truly believe that he thinks he can have a Trump museum, a Trump hotel, you know, sitting right in the middle of Gaza or on the beach of Gaza. So I think he really feels that. And so do I think it's real? Yes. I mean, you know, Bibi Netanyahu has an ego, but President Trump has an ego too. And he doesn't care less. If it's going to make him look good, whether he really means it in his heart of wanting peace, which I feel, but I'm not in his mind and heart. But he wants to be known as that president that made peace in the Middle East. And I do strongly feel about that. So I think the things that he's trying to do when he said, hey, yeah, I'm tired of the killing and all that, as I used to tell folks, I can care less what he feels in his heart. But if he can make that happen, he has my support. Because right now, we, the United States of America, we are complicit in the killing of innocent women and children in Gaza. Because guess what, Jackson, as you know, we fund it, we provide equipment, and we provide diplomatic cover. And that makes all of us here in the United States of America, and even those that are abroad that have a place in Miami, but currently in Moscow, we are still complicit in what the United States of America is doing.
And Chief, I think you're 100% right. It's not about questioning what is Trump's moral attitude on the matter. It's about just the practical situation. What is the material situation? Which leads me to the question of how practical is it for the United States to participate in these matters at Israel's behest, whether it's in Iran or in Lebanon, in the south of Lebanon, or in Gaza, or more recently, what we saw with the failed operations in Yemen, where the United States, for a few months, they tried under the Trump administration, following the path of the Biden administration, and they didn't really achieve much. As a 28-year U.S. Air Force veteran, is our Air Force really capable? Is our military capable of dealing with these perceived threats in the Middle East?
Well, Jackson, let me just say one thing that you just said, perceived, and I like that word, perceived threats. One of the reasons I wrote my book, Deadly Betrayal, 4,500 military men and women of the United States military lost their lives based on a WMD lie on behalf of Israel. What did it do? Nothing. We got people killed because of the Iraqi insurgency. Yemen, the so-called peace deal we made with Yemen, they've been fighting a war for decades with Saudi Arabia. What did Saudi Arabia accomplish? Nothing. What did we accomplish with the continuous bombing of Yemen? Nothing. We say we're the most powerful military in the world, but there's certain military objectives that we cannot do. And you cannot truly fight an insurgency. And that's what, even though parts of the Yemen country is controlled by militants, there's no way to destroy them unless you go in with ground forces. And we're not going to do that because 4,500 military men and women, thousands in Afghanistan were killed. Think about this, Jackson. For what? The Taliban in Afghanistan, they're back in control. We went in to remove them. Do you think you're going to be able to remove Hamas? No. They're steadily recruiting. As people from throughout the Middle East see the innocent women and children and men being killed in Gaza, that is a recruiting tool. And so, going back to your question and what we're doing, is it accomplishing anything? No. It's adding to the problem. Are many people being killed? Yes. But is it accomplished anything? No. Can the military, with all our elite technology and weapons, accomplish this? No. It's going to take diplomacy.
I agree with you.
Take that to the bank. That's a fact.
I agree. It's always shocking to me, but even those B-2 bombers, they're so hard to detect from what I understand. Even the best air defense systems, they're hard to detect. And even they struggle to achieve their goals. They wanted to bomb one of the Houthi missile factories that's located deep in a mountainside. And you have no way of knowing what the internal structure of these mountains are. How can you bomb it? It's the same thing in Iran. They want to target Iran's nuclear sites. Do you think that that's even a feasible option to say, oh, we're going to do this and it's going to be successful? Is that even a possibility to bomb Iran's nuclear sites?
Oh, you can bomb them. You may even be able to do some damage, with the bunker busters and so forth. Yeah, you can do that. It may put Iran back a little bit, but you got to remember, just take, like you stated a few minutes ago, the Houthis, how they have their missiles and rockets buried, in deep, in the ground, into the mountains. Well, Iran, they're even more technology sound in being able to protect their weapon system. The only way you're going to be able to do that, and we cannot do it, is a nuclear weapon. That's going to be the only way. Yeah, can you bomb it and do some damage? Absolutely. But as I stated earlier, the only way to the so-called defeat the objective, defeat whether it be the Iranians or the Houthis, is going to take ground forces being there and taking out the personnel who operates these systems. And I don't think the American people will stomach that, and that's why that's not been done so far. I can tell you there are planners out there that probably want to do that, want to put troops on the ground in Yemen and probably eventually Iran. But if you thought that Iraq was bad, it would be terribly bad. You know, Iran is a lot larger country, more military personnel, and times have changed with technology since the Iraq War. And so I don't think we will see that. And let me just say this.
Sorry, what were you saying?
One other thing, too. I'm sorry, Jackson. And if we ever decide we want to go to war with Iran, Iran have ballistic missiles that are very accurate. They don't need a nuclear weapon. We keep saying, oh, they're far. And Jackson, I know this show. Let me just mention one other thing, too. I always tell folks to do critical thinking. You know, we got lied into the war in Iraq based on WMD. So I tell folks now, my message now, fool us once, shame on them. Iran is building a nuclear weapon. Well, Bibi's been saying that. Some of our folks have been saying that for decades. Since you were in high school, they're weeks away from a nuclear weapon. They don't want a nuclear weapon. They don't need one. They have ballistic missiles that can do just as much damage to Israel if they wanted to. So what I'll say to you on that, fool us once, shame on them. Iraq, WMD, fool us again, shame on us. Iran having nuclear weapons.
Yes, yeah. It's really true. They are a very technologically advanced power. Iran is, and the whole thing 2 weeks away from a nuclear bomb. You hear it every other week. It's really quite something. They believe we're this stupid. As I was saying, though, what's that?
I said thank you for saying that because they think we're stupid, and that's why I said yes. They don't realize we're doing critical thinking now. You know.
Well, we have people like you that are exposing it from the most upper echelons of power, which is exactly what is needed. And I want to ask you about Ukraine and Russia as well. Obviously, every war is different. You know, when we look at the Middle East right now, you're talking about guerrilla militants in some cases, Yemen, maybe they're more armed, far more armed than Hamas and Hezbollah, but going up against a conventional power. When we look at Russia, you've got a very strong conventional military against Ukraine, which has for years been armed and backed and all these defensive positions put up by NATO. How and what are the biggest things that we've seen change over the last 20 to 30 years in terms of conventional warfare that we see playing out with Russia and NATO's proxy of Ukraine today?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jackson. And I can say it in one word: drones. You know, in previous war, you never heard anything about drones, you know, unmanned aerial vehicles. And that technology has changed so dramatically now. You know, previous wars, you know, you never heard that. We didn't even know what a drone was at the time. So you hear about the attacks by drones, and that has changed so dramatically now and changed warfare, you know, and that's one of the major technologies right now. Even the number of satellites that we have in the air, both militarily and civilian, you know, with Musk, if you will, you know. So the technology has changed dramatically in that regard. And let me just share something with you. When you mentioned about the Russian-Ukraine war, you know, when you look at that, and I've been telling folks this for the longest, at any time, if you see what's going on in Gaza right now, the carnage and destruction, we've actually just really torn the country up. There's no more infrastructure left. Well, at any time, if so desired, Russia could do that to Ukraine. They're being, you know, I guess there's no such thing as being nice in warfare, but so you get what I'm saying and understand what I'm saying. They're being nice. You know, they're trying to bring something to the table. Yeah, does Putin have a reason? Does he have an objective? Yeah, he does, but he's doing it slowly without totally destroying Ukraine. At any time, he can take out all the infrastructure of Ukraine. And unfortunately, once again, you know, on our behalf, the Ukraine people are dying on behalf of the United States of America because they want to, our government wants to weaken Russia based on us feeling our exceptionalism that we should be able to control the entire world. And that's what it's all about, Jackson, is our control of the world, to include Russia and China. You know, China don't want no part of war. They want to be business partners. We introduced China to capitalism under the Rick Nixon years. And then they became competitors. Now we're mad. They're competing with us. Now we want to make them an enemy, if you will. No, they like, quasi-capitalism. It expanded China. But we want to make them an enemy. We want to be able to control them. Likewise, we want to be able to control the minerals in Ukraine, the minerals in Russia, and the oil in Russia as well. So it's all about control. And that's a fact.
Do you think Trump is in a position where he'd be willing to accept reality and negotiate a peace deal? I mean, you had J.D. Vance last week. He went down and said that Russia's asking for too much right now in these negotiations. It's just not feasible, he said. They're asking for too much. Do you think that logic will prevail, or do you think his ego will get the best of him?
No, I really think if we really want peace, logic will prevail. And let me just mention this. In all negotiations, everybody starts wanting more. That's why you negotiate, to find that midpoint. Now, I think, once again, not a fact, because I don't know what's in Putin's mind, our mind, government's mind, but I can tell you that, you have that Donbass region of Russian-speaking Ukrainians. I think Russia is going to keep that. Those people that are in that part of Ukraine want to be a part of Russia. And so I think as part of the peace deal, that is going to happen. And that's going to be the only way. So I think if that was offered up, I think you could see a peace deal in the making. I really do. And that's what really started the war. Let me just give you an example of this when I said control. This is something maybe some of your audience have heard me previously, but I want to repeat this again just for the new. When you look at Russia, they have been warning us for the longest, a part of history again. And I happen to be what we call on a couple of congressional delegations back when the Soviet Union split and the Warsaw Pact split. And we said that we will not expand NATO. And look what we did. And so you get a person like Putin who loves his country the way we love our country and say, hey, look, that's a threat to our security as you keep expanding NATO. Ukraine is going to be the red line. Back in May of 2023, the Eisenhower Media Network, which I'm a part of as a director, we put out a New York Times page ad saying that the U.S. should be used as a force for peace. And we put a map in that piece, and we said that imagine if the United States was surrounded in Canada with Russian weapon systems and nuclear weapons and Mexico. We would lose our minds, Jackson. That would be a threat to us. We would be, we would all lose our minds. Well, that's what we did to Russia. Yeah. We surrounded them with no empathy for their security. And see, people like you and me, Jackson, then we're become so-called mouthpieces for Russia. Hell no, I'm no mouthpiece for Russia. I do love my country, but I'm not afraid to speak out against my country and have empathy for others. We always talking about our security, but yet we don't care about nobody else's security. So Russia said, forget you. We care about our security. China, we care about our security. North Korea, we could care about our security. We need to have empathy for others' security. So in order for Russia to have that security, Ukraine is going to lose that Donbass region. Mm-hmm. And I think Trump, there's no question. When you ask me the question about Trump, yes, he's willing to do that. But it's outsiders that are not willing to do that. But they're going to have to give that up. And there's no question in my mind Trump is willing to do that.
God willing, we see that happen. The blood stops being shed very soon. I can only hope. Chief Dennis Fritz, thank you so much for joining me today. Where should people follow along with you online to stay up to date with your work, and where can they purchase your book?
Hey, thanks for asking that question. First of all, they can purchase it like a lot of folks do through Amazon, but my publisher will be happy if you go directly to him at OR Publisher, OR, the way it sounds, OR Publishing. And I would ask your audience to absolutely get the book, not because I'm promoting, but it'll give you the history of the Middle East and how we got to where we are now. And it's a quick read. I wrote it so that it's quick and easy and understandable. And I would ask that your folks go out there and get that and it'll bring them up to date on where we are today. Likewise, how to follow me is EisenhowerMediaNetwork.org. And you'll find all my writings and all my pieces and others as I mentioned, we have Larry Wilkerson. I think you know Larry Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff to Colin Powell. And of course, the Ford mentioned Ray McGovern. And so I have some great colleagues. And Jackson, I want to thank you. Now, don't get offended when I say this. I love talking to the young people. You say, because I want to provide you the information and the history. And it's up to you and your young followers to take our information, and then gather the others to do that critical thinking. Because the people of my age, we followed along. You know, we were indoctrinated. But you look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, this is wrong. Why are we doing this? And the last thing I'll leave you with, what disappoints me most, is that we have our Congress who's 90% bought and paid for to allow the killing of innocent women and children. And what I like to leave your audience, if our Congress think that little of the killing of women and children, imagine to stay in office what they would do against us.
Very true. Very true. They have no regard for human life, and that does not exclude American lives. So thank you so much. And with your knowledge, we will educate the masses. So, and hopefully, God willing, we'll have a public that is awake and will not repeat the mistakes of the past. So, Chief, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. You take care.